recap, what we're going to talk about today is ME/CFS and interrupting the stressors. Okay? And we're going to explore why it's important to interrupt the stressors. What can calm your physiology, your mind and body, and may promote the body's attempts to do the healing work. So why is this important? Well, if we don't address the fight, flight, freeze response, then this can hinder our healing. And it can mean that we're kind of a slave to our emotions, our thoughts and our feelings. This can result in frustrations, that we know what our goal is, but we don't know how to change the patterns that are getting in the way, and we end up feeling stuck. So some of the mistakes people make is, number one, they believe that they can't change. They say, I've tried lots of things and I still haven't managed to address the stress, the anxiety I'm experiencing. And I can relate to that because I tried lots of things to try and address the stress that I was experiencing. But when we get this right, then actually you can make progress. It can have the effect of calming our mind, body, physiology. The body can do the repair work. And one of the beneficial side effects is that we're training the mind and rewiring the brain. So what do we need to do? First idea I want to share is that it is possible to interrupt these unhelpful stressors. And in order to do that, we kind of need to understand the relationship between our emotions, our thoughts and our feelings. So let's talk about that. What we need to consider is that we can experience sensations in our body. Those sensations can be physical sensations, and they can be emotions. Okay? Now, in order to kind of define emotions, it's useful to give an example. So imagine you're about to leave your house, you open the front door, and there's a hungry tiger licking its lips, looking at you. So you're going to experience physical sensations in your body, and you're going to experience an emotion. That emotion might be fear. Would be quite reasonable to experience fear when there's a hungry tiger outside your front door. And that response, if you like, is an honest, unfiltered response. So consider that response in your body happens more quickly than the thoughts that you generate as a result of seeing that tiger. Okay, it's the primitive part of the brain and body that generate those responses. And after you've experienced the emotion, you'll have a thought. Okay, so it's a slower response. And you might have some beliefs. So you might have the belief that tigers are dangerous. That's a completely reasonable belief. And you're going to experience feelings as a result of seeing the tiger, having those thoughts. So you might experience anxiety. So I'd like you to consider that fear is the consequence of the emotion, and anxiety is a consequence of thoughts, beliefs and feelings. And those feelings of anxiety may cause us to adopt certain behaviours. We might close the front door. Now, consider that if we repeat that pattern, having an emotion, a physical sensation, then having thoughts, having feelings, and we repeat that pattern many times, then that can become an instantaneous response, an automated response, okay? So by the definition I'm using of emotions, it can become an emotion, i.e. an instantaneous response. To just give you another example, imagine someone knocks on your door. You're just about to go and have a rest because you're feeling quite tired. There might be times when you feel excited that someone's come to visit you, but on this day, because you're feeling really tired, you have a sinking feeling. And you have that sinking feeling because your thinking mind starts generating some thoughts. You start saying to yourself, oh, I should invite them in because they've come all this way. It would be impolite not to do so. They might be upset. So now your behaviour to let them in is driven by your thinking, and you've suppressed that emotional response, which was the emotional response, which was that kind of honest response. Let's just check, to what degree do you relate to that sometimes you have an emotional, honest response in your body, it might be that sinking feeling, but you suppress it and you go to your head and you have a thought which is probably a result of some conditioning. Is that something you can relate to? Certainly it's something I can recognise, that often my behaviours weren't driven by my emotions, my honest response to that situation, but were driven by my thoughts about what I felt I should do. Okay, so consider that once we start understanding that relationship between our emotions, thoughts, feelings, behaviours, it gives us some options that we may not have considered. So let me just tidy up my mind map. My mind map seems to have got a bit muddled. All right, so, and it might be that the outcome from being polite is that you end up feeling even more drained. Who's ever done that? Certainly that is something I recognise that I did at times when I had CFS. I kind of put other people before myself. Just to give you another example of this relationship between emotions, thoughts, feelings. Imagine a small child decides to be helpful and starts sweeping the floor, and because they're holding the broom, they don't realise that the handle of the broom is close to a vase and it knocks the vase over, and now the mother rushes in hearing a crash of a broken vase and is upset because that vase was very special, given to them by their grandmother. And the child sees that the mother is upset, so now is in a state of stress. So in one scenario, let's imagine the mother's upset and hasn't got the social skills to recognise that the child is upset, and so doesn't comfort the child. They're just focused on the vase. So they haven't got the kind of emotional skills that they might need, actually not social skills. So that child is now in a state of distress. And because that child doesn't know how to handle the distress, rather than stay in that state of emotion, they shift to their mind and create a thought. And that thought might be, I'm bad because I've upset my mother. Okay? And if that kind of scenario is repeated, where the child doesn't get comforted when it needs comforting, then it might reinforce those beliefs that they have created, that I'm bad, there's something wrong with me, I'm not lovable, whatever it is. Okay, so second scenario, the mother recognizes that the child is upset and comforts the child. And so now the child doesn't develop those beliefs around that incident. Okay, so just consider that often people do go to thinking because they can't handle the sensations. How often have you noticed a physical sensation, some symptom, and you go to your mind and you create a story? You say to yourself, this has happened again. What an idiot I am for overdoing it. Am I ever going to get well? And if we ask questions in a negative state, we kind of tend to answer them at some level. So we're saying, I'm not going to get well. So we're making all these predictions, we're catastrophizing, rather than just being able to notice, I noticed this physical sensation. Maybe I notice there's an emotion, I'm feeling disappointed or upset. And just being able to stay with that emotion without going to our head, creating lots of story and creating feelings of anxiety because of what we're saying to ourselves. So, and what this means is that we have this kind of relationship to our sensations. We notice a sensation, we have a thought, and that results in feelings of anxiety. Now, if we're experiencing anxiety, that's going to mean we experience more sensation in the body. And so when we notice that elevated sensation, we have another thought, and that escalates our anxiety. And so this is one of the ways that we can generate anxiety, is we notice sensation, we have thoughts about the sensation, because it's often challenging for people to sit with the emotion without going to their head and creating a story. Okay, so I'm going to share a few strategies for dealing with emotions, for dealing with my iPad's gone blank. Let's see if I can recover my iPad. There you go. So I want to share some strategies for dealing with emotions, thoughts, beliefs, feelings. Okay, so I want you to consider that when we experience a sensation, we don't necessarily have to have a thought. Okay, so one strategy for dealing with sensations, be it a physical sensation or an emotion, is to practice experiencing that sensation. So one way of doing that is mindfulness. And there's research that I was listening to a podcast recently. There's research that shows that mindfulness can actually have a beneficial effect on our immune system. Okay. Now, for some people, sitting with that sensation can be challenging. Okay, so if someone's experienced trauma, it can be difficult to stay in your body, and that's why people go to their mind, because the experience of being in their body is challenging. And someone was saying this to me the other day. In that case, we can practice grounding exercises. Or we can practice anchoring, getting into an anchor and titrating and pendulating. This is where, so an anchor is when we get ourselves into a resourceful state, might be I'm in a calm state, and then we allow ourselves to just experience a little bit of that experience of being in their body. And if it feels too much, we can come back to our anchor. And so that's pendulating between those two states, the anchor of calm, let's say, and just allowing ourselves to experience a little bit of body experience and going back to the anchor if it's too much. Okay, so thinking, how do we deal with, okay, let's say we've experienced some sensation, and as we said, sensations can be either physical or emotional, and we've gone to our head, we've created some thinking. So some strategies here. Number one is to actually just get really clear, to identify the thinking. What is it we are saying to ourselves? Because sometimes, and I talked about this in the session last week about identifying the unhelpful responses. Sometimes we're saying stuff to ourselves, but it's unconscious. And sometimes people say, oh, I'm not sure what I'm saying to myself. And I'll give you a strategy for dealing with that in a moment. Some people learn brain training techniques which involve using a stop. And one of the things, again, I talked about last week is sometimes the stop actually generates more stress and anxiety. And if that's the case, you need to stop doing that and find other solutions. If you need to chat to a practitioner to explore other ways of using brain training techniques, that's what you need to do. Okay, so I gave an example last week. Sometimes saying stop, people feel more anxious, and actually sometimes you have to change the way you use a stop. And actually I prefer to talk about a pause process rather than a stop process, because stop feels like you're telling yourself off, whereas pause is just saying, actually, let's pause here and let's just check out what's going on here. And it can be really useful to kind of develop your capacity to process your thinking. I teach people something called the critical thinking method, because often things we're saying to ourselves actually aren't very helpful, and they are actually not grounded in reality. We might recognize that our thinking is driven by our beliefs. So in the example I gave earlier, the child kind of created this belief that I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm unlovable. Okay, so we need to, number one, identify the belief. And if that belief doesn't serve us, then we need to shift or heal that belief. And when I'm working with people, I teach people a process called the healing wounds process. Okay. So let's just pause there. If you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. I'll give you a moment. Also, just let me know, to what degree do you relate to this? To what degree do you think you have that kind of tendency to notice sensations but find it challenging just to sit with that physical sensation or sit with that emotion, and you tend to go to your thought, your mind, and create thoughts, stories, catastrophize, etc.? Could you talk more in relation to the anchor? Yeah, so anchoring, we've done exercises in these Facebook Lives where we're just actually getting ourselves into a relaxed state. You might use the timeout relaxation technique that I've taught, and maybe we'll end with a brief relaxation if we've got time. You might use any technique that works for you that helps you get into a relaxed state. So does that, just let me know, Penny, if that answers your question. Good question. There are certain things you can do to reinforce that anchor. So for example, you get yourself into a relaxed state and you squeeze your finger and thumb as you get into a relaxed state. This is a hypnosis technique that I teach people, and by repetition we can access that relaxed state more easily. Just to give you an example of anchors, when an anchor is when a stimulus results in a certain response. So for an example of that is you hear a piece of music and it takes you back to a particular time in your life. If I hear the track Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic by The Police, it instantly takes me back to sitting in a maths classroom thinking about this girl I fancied. All right, so okay. Helen says, with the stop method, I agree, that leads to... Yeah, it can lead to more trauma, Helen, depending on how it's done. Therefore, it's important, if you are experiencing that, to work with someone perhaps to find other ways that work for you. So Helen says, do you think it's useful to explore your triggers and thought process, or best to move on with mindfulness and grounding? Ultimately, that's a great question. Let me just come back to that. Here's the thing. it can be really useful to practice the grounding and mindfulness if that's the most comfortable thing for you to do. But the more we understand the relationship between the sensation, our thoughts, beliefs and feelings, then we can actually break the patterns. If I recognize, let's say I'm saying to myself, every time I do something, every time I make a mistake, I'm stupid, and that's because I've had that belief and I've reinforced that belief, then actually if I am unconsciously saying that to myself, I'm getting into a state of stress, I'm feeling rage towards myself, and it's unconscious. If I become conscious of that, oh, okay, I'm saying to myself, I'm stupid, I always make mistakes. Well, hang on, that's not always true. I'm not always doing silly things. Sometimes I do really smart things. And actually, we all make mistakes. So if we start to understand what's going on, and it can be unconscious, for instance, sometimes people feel depressed, and that's because they're suppressing, certain feelings. And if they recognize that pattern, then they can shift it. So in answer to your question, if it's safer for you right now to do the grounding, the mindfulness, then do that. It can be really useful to understand the recipe, if you like, of how we generate those feelings, because if we understand that pattern, then we can shift it. Sometimes we can shift it through the mindfulness, through the grounding, and sometimes it's kind of useful to do that exploratory work. So hopefully that let me know if that answers your question. Colin says, yes, please, just came in from a track meet. Okay. Is that in relation to the relaxation, Colin? And Penny says, thanks, that makes it clear. So let's just go back to the next thing is working with feelings. Actually, let's keep it on that page. So how can we work with our feelings? Colleen says, yes, relaxation needed. Okay, we've got time. I will end with a short relaxation. So strategies for working with feelings. First thing is to identify the feeling. Again, often we're not very good at identifying feelings. Okay, so practicing tuning in. What am I feeling right now? Is a powerful strategy. And actually the very act of identifying the feeling means that we can shift from, actually I'm trying to think whether I added that slide. Yeah, so the act of identifying the emotion, the thought, the feeling means that rather than being in it, and an example, if someone cuts me up and I'm driving along and I feel angry, if I'm just in that state of anger, I might, walk into the office, bang my briefcase down on the desk in a grumpy mood. If I bring attention and awareness and say, I'm generating anger right now, then it's easier to become the observer of that, and therefore to create some distance between what we're experiencing. And by observing it, which is the act of mindfulness, we can actually start to calm our physiology. We're not saying it's bad or wrong. We're not trying to push it away. We're just shifting in awareness. Okay? So that's why it's really can be important and powerful to identify the thinking, the beliefs, the feelings, the emotions. Okay? As mentioned, you could use that kind of stop or pause process. The other thing you can do is to process the feelings. How do you do that? Well, you work backwards. You recognise that the feelings are a consequence of some beliefs, some thinking. Maybe it's a result of not being able to sit with the sensation. Okay? So, and going back to Helen's question, it's useful to do that because then it can help us just break the pattern. Sometimes I work with people and they've been told to, if they notice a feeling that's an unhelpful feeling, they just kind of say stop to the feeling, but they've not actually done any of that exploratory work to kind of identify what, just use another colour, where that feeling came from. And if we recognize, if we kind of do that investigative work, then it gives us insights and we can then change the patterns. Okay? So, how do you deal with POTS such as a high pulse? I could feel it at the track meet, so sat down to watch. Also did a long, slow out breath. What do you recommend? Yeah, so I think you missed the kind of beginning of today. So what I was talking about was, let me just quickly go back, is that our tendency is when we notice that sensation, that physical sensation, that we go to thought and create a story, catastrophize, and then, you know, that just results in this loop of sensation, thought, anxiety, more sensation, more thought, more anxiety. So yeah, absolutely what you're doing, mindfulness, taking a slow breath, just observing without going to our thought and creating story. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. So, if you've got any questions about this, feel free to get in touch. If you've got any final comments, pop them in the chat right now. Otherwise, so Colin says, yes, I just said no. All okay. Just said, yeah. So it's like you're deciding to have some thoughts in that situation that are reassuring. Okay. And that's a way of calming your physiology. So great strategy. All right, so let's just end with a very brief relaxation. And maybe we'll do some stuff just around grounding. So what I'd like you to do is just to make yourself comfortable. Obviously, only close your eyes if it's safe to do so. Don't close your eyes if you're doing anything like driving or tightrope walking or juggling knives when it wouldn't be safe to do so. So I'll answer that question in a moment, Helen. Well, I'll actually answer that now. Get in touch with me. There's a couple of ways in which you can learn more about that. So yeah, just make yourself comfortable. Ensure that your hands and arms and legs and feet are in a comfortable position. You may choose to uncross your legs. Whatever you're doing, just ensure you're comfortable. And I'd like you just to focus on your breath for a moment. Breathing in. If it's comfortable to do so, you can breathe in through your nose, breathing into your belly, and breathing out through your nose. Just ensuring that the out breath is a little bit longer than the in breath. I'd like you just to imagine a thread at the top of your head, just pulling your posture up and your chin down to just ensure that your posture is good right now. And as you take that breath in through your nose into your belly and out through your nose, just focusing on that breath, you might imagine it as a colour. Breathe in that colour, allow it to filter into your lungs, and as you do, it's oxygenating the blood. And now that oxygen is being carried in your bloodstream, reaching the cells, And as it reaches the cells receive the oxygen and the nourishment, and they do some detoxing, letting go of whatever the cells need to let go of, and it gets collected by your blood and filtered and cleaned. And so just that act of taking a breath, stilling your mind, quietening your mind, allowing the body to slow down, allowing your mind to slow down. You're allowing your body just to do some repair work, some healing. As you allow yourself to breathe in and out, just be aware of the contact between your body and any surfaces touching your body. Focus on one sensation in your body. It might be the contact between your body and your chair, or if you're lying down, the contact between your body and whatever you're lying on. And now just move to another physical sensation. Could be a sensation between your fingers or your toes, whatever you're wearing on your feet, or the contact between the air and your feet. Just focus on a second sensation for a moment. And now move your attention to a third sensation in your body. And just notice whatever you notice when you focus on that sensation. And what I'd like you to consider is that you can take yourself through that simple exercise whenever you choose. And in doing that, you're just allowing your mind and body to let go, soften and relax. So if you like, you can continue relaxing. But if you like, you can just let me know, how did you find doing that relaxation exercise? And as I said, if you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch. I do a half-hour session, free session, 3 free sessions every week, where we can just find out a bit more about your situation and identify some sticking points and a few strategies to help you move forward. I don't do any selling in that session. It's just an opportunity to find out more about your situation. If you want to know about what I do, you have to ask. So if you'd like one of those free sessions, just let me know. There's no obligation to be a client. So Helen says, brilliant, just what I needed after expending too much physical energy. You should sell mindfulness relaxation MP3s. Well, funny you should say that, Helen. I do sell a couple, and I've got another one that I need to do. But thank you. So thanks for joining me. Wishing you great health. And bye for now.